Tonight on Primetime Politics, targeting China.
China wants to make a deal. They just don't know how quite to go about it.
The U.S. administration raises the stakes in its trade war with the People's Republic of China, slapping Chinese goods with a 125% tariff and pausing retaliatory tariffs for 90 days. But that does not apply to Canada, so how should this country respond? That's coming up. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the unpredictability of Trump's trade policies was on full display today. The U.S. president announcing a 90-day pause on the global tariffs he introduced just last week. He also announced the imposition of a 125% tariff on all goods going to the United States from the People's Republic of China. Now, take a look at what Donald Trump had to say on Truth Social. He says, "I am hereby raising the tariff charge to China by the United States of America to 125% effective immediately." Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States and that these countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape, or form against the United States, I've authorized a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. Now, Trump's decision to do this follows some punishing days on the global markets and also comes after China vowed it would fight the Trump tariffs announced last week with an 84% retaliatory counter tariff of its own. Well, let's talk a bit more about this tariff war between the U.S. and China and how it might affect Canada. We're happy to have back on the program again Guy Saint-Jacques, Canada's ambassador to China from 2012 to 2016. Monsieur Saint-Jacques, thank you again for the time.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Mr. Serapio.
Now, Beijing says it will fight U.S. tariffs to the end and that it has the means to fight this war. You know, given what you know, given the size of the Chinese economy, is that a statement that Beijing can actually back up?
I think so. And there are many aspects to this. I think that President Xi Jinping would face a very strong domestic reaction if he were not to push back on the tariff imposed by President Trump. And it's true that the Chinese economy is not in the best shape. The housing sector is still going slowly. There's a lot of debt. But at the same time, China is using this to portray itself as a much more reliable partner than the United States. It says that it's a champion of globalization, of free trade, that it keeps its word. And I think it's part of its plan to try to occupy more space. And they feel that, in fact, Donald Trump is giving them the opportunity to do so. It's true that in terms of exports, they are still relying on the U.S. market, but the proportion of their exports that goes to the U.S. has gone from it was at 19.2% in 2018, and last year it was at 14.7%. And also, they have indicated that they could consider other measures to retaliate against the United States.
Okay, so things to continue to watch for. Because, you know, meanwhile, though, you know, here we have Canada in its own trade war with China PRC. Canada slapping 100% on Chinese EVs, 25% on steel and aluminum. China imposing 100% tariff on Canadian canola and some agricultural products. But given the challenge that Donald Trump is presenting to both economies now, is it time to revisit those tariffs from the Canadian perspective?
Well, I would say first that if the war between the United States and China goes on for a while, we may benefit from that because, of course, the latest tariffs that China will apply amount to 84%. But now we have just heard that President Trump will impose more tariffs, that it will go up to 125% on China. And there are some products, agricultural products, that we sell that, in fact, could replace U.S. agricultural products. But more broadly, I think that the fact that we will have a new government in Ottawa in about 1 month, I think is a good opportunity for us to reassess where we want to be with China. And we have seen that by following very closely what the U.S. is doing, that it didn't buy us any brownie points in Washington, quite the contrary. And therefore, I think we should reassess the tariffs that we have imposed on Chinese electric vehicles, maybe follow a more systematic approach like that was pursued in Europe, where they did a study and they came up with tariffs that vary between about 10 to 35%. And the Chinese market remains a difficult one, but I think it's possible for Canada to do business. Last year we exported almost $30 billion worth of goods. I think there are a possibility to increase that, and we have to assume that things will remain very challenging with the U.S. administration. So in terms of diversifying our trade, we'll have to look to China and, of course, at other countries that have been identified in the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Mm-hmm. But do we need to be concerned about that? Because, as you noted, China is using this opportunity to build itself up around the world as the reliable trade partner. But up against that, that push to define itself, we also know that China PRC has interfered in Canadian elections, intimidates Canadian citizens. Is there still not a danger of, regardless of what we're going through with the United States, is there not a danger of engaging with China on trade?
Well, of course, we will have to be very careful, and I think we have learned a lot in the last few years about the behavior of China. And China use bullying tactics, coercive measures, and we have been victim of that. So I think it will be a matter for the federal government to establish its own red lines and to tell China that interference in the Canadian electoral process or among the Chinese community in Canada won't be tolerated, that if we catch people trying to steal our technology, they will be charged, and so it won't come to where it was previously. But I think we cannot ignore China. China is a big superpower. It will use this crisis with the United States to continue to buttress the support it gets in developing countries that many are very affected by Donald Trump's tariffs. And I think for these reasons, it's possible to be firm in our relationship with China and to increase trade. But of course, it will remain a difficult situation. And I think in parallel, because we are also in a situation where we need a more predictable trade environment to continue doing business. Canada is very trade dependent in terms of our GDP. I think that Canada should launch an initiative with allies, European allies, countries like Japan, South Korea, including China, to try to establish maybe a parallel organization to the similar to the World Trade Organization, but that would exclude the United States, but have clear rules for everyone on the way forward and establish a level playing field with clear penalties for countries that don't play by the rule.
Exclude the United States because it has proven itself unreliable?
Well, yes, and I think that, in the case of Donald Trump, he had signed a revised North American Free Trade Agreement in 2018. He doesn't honor his word. We know that the method that he is using to impose tariffs it doesn't make any sense. Economists have criticized it. I would say all economists have criticized it. And therefore, unless there are major changes in Washington, I think we have to treat them as unreliable partners. We'll have to see. In fact, once we have a new government, I think it's worth to make an effort to try to clarify the rules. But for this, there will always be this Damocles sword on whether Mr. Trump will change his mind again in the future.
Guy Saint-Jacques, always appreciate the insight. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, at last word, Canadian officials are still trying to fully understand the impact of the latest Trump tariff declarations, but the 90-day pause does not seem to apply to Canada because the global tariffs introduced last week did not include this country. But the other tariffs applied to this country by the United States are still in place. They include 10% on Canadian energy and potash, 25% on non-CUSMA compliant goods, 25% on aluminum and steel, and 25% on Canadian-made vehicles.
We have more car manufacturers, Roger, coming into our country now. Speaking of cars, we've never seen anything like it. And they're coming in because of the election, but they're coming in because of the tariffs, because they don't want to pay 25 or 50 or whatever it may be. They don't want to pay that. They can't pay that. We had 3 cancellations in Mexico, building a plant. They're all coming into the United States. Canada, they're coming in. From China, they're coming in from everywhere.
Well, for some reaction to all this tariff talk, we're now joined by Patrick Brown, the Mayor of Brampton in Ontario. Mayor, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Listen, the counter tariffs against U.S.-built vehicles, they went into effect early this morning. This was before we heard from Donald Trump later in the day. Do you still think those counter tariffs make sense in any way?
I do. I think it's important. If we're being bullied at this, if we're facing an economic attack, we don't take it lying down. I think we need to use every tool at our disposal, and there's no one magic response. But I think compounding the effects of all these tools, the goal is to stand up for Canada. We don't build Canadian cars. We don't build American cars. We don't build Mexican cars. We build North American cars. So this is not something we've asked for. We don't believe tariffs make sense. It's a tax. It makes us less competitive. It's a gift to Japanese auto companies, German auto companies, at the expense of our North American auto sector. And so we need to talk sense into the U.S. administration, the Trump administration. Hopefully they'll see in short order the gravity of their mistake.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what you're hearing from Stellantis, because in Brampton it is a Stellantis assembly plant that employs thousands of people. What are they saying about the tariffs? Have you heard anything at all?
Well, they're very concerned. Just yesterday, we had a roundtable with the local Unifor representatives. I've been in regular contact with Stellantis. The fact that the plant the product for the plant that was to be reopened has now been canceled indefinitely. We have thousands of jobs at risk. And I can tell you that the head of their union, Vito, is very concerned. They're never coming back. And I'm not just concerned about the Stellantis jobs. We have thousands of related auto parts jobs in our community that are also at risk. And so, I worry that if this tariff fight becomes protracted, you're going to start to see consumers simply change their market behavior, and the North American product will become less and less competitive.
Less and less competitive because necessarily with tariffs they become more expensive. Is that the argument?
That's the argument, is that we're making a product that is built in North America less competitive. Consumers will choose other options that don't have these punitive taxes. Ronald Reagan, when he argued against tariffs and encouraged free trade with Canada, always spoke about the fact taxes don't make us more competitive. Eventually, we all pay. Americans are going to pay more. Canadians are going to pay more. And unfortunately, thousands of families are going to lose their jobs. So for the Stellantis workers in Brampton, the Magna workers, the Associated Auto Parts Company workers in Brampton, I'm concerned, and I want to make sure we really double down on making sure that we create other opportunities for employment if these sectors are diminished.
Well, and to that, in terms of looking to the future, the idea or the thought was around the Stellantis plant in Brampton, I don't have to tell you, was to retool it for EVs and hybrid, because that would be the future of the auto industry. I hear what you're saying about concerns that Stellantis may not restart the plant. Does that mean then that Brampton will be shut out of the future of what cars are going to be?
Yeah, it's very alarming. We were excited to have this retooling, this EV retooling, to market for the needs of consumers of tomorrow. I worry that Canadian plants are at risk. I don't believe it's just Stellantis and Brampton. The worry is that all these auto footprints that are for North American production are going to be at risk. It's why we need to use every tool in our toolbook to push back against this Trump policy. I was down in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago with Canadian mayors, and I have to tell you, senators, congressmen, we're all saying we don't support these tariffs. I think there's a lot of support in Washington for the Canadian position and for this historic friendship. I really feel there needs to be a two-toned approach right now. One, persuasion to try to talk sense into the Trump administration, but two, making sure that we stand up for our industries. I can tell you right now in Brampton, in Peel region, even with our local utility, Electra, we have changed our procurement rules to say we're now prioritizing made in Canada. There is economic consequence for this policy in the U.S., and they have to feel it. If they don't feel it, I worry they'll continue down this reckless path.
You use the term economic consequence, and of course for people that who are on the bubble of losing their paychecks are concerned about that. What are you looking for from Ottawa and other levels of government to help see your community through really uncertain times up against the Trump administration?
So there's a few things that need to be done. One, we need help to find new trade routes and markets for companies that may lose contracts in the U.S. This is a large global market, and right now, partly because of geography, we've been lazy in our dependence on the U.S. I think we need to aggressively, whether it's Invest Ontario, whether it's the Federal Economic Development Agency, we need to aggressively look at new markets for Canadian products. I look in Brampton, from toothpaste to mattresses that we export to the U.S., I want to find new markets for those great Canadian-made products. I'd also say, these procurement policies that are favoring Canadian products, let's retrain Canadian workers for those potential new contracts. When I mentioned utilities, just yesterday, Electra announced they're going to switch from American smart meters and American transformers to Canadian-made ones. Maybe there's some auto workers that are currently unemployed right now that we could retrain to build transformers. I think we need to look outside the box to make sure that families have jobs, that those that may be pushed out of employment because of this reckless Trump policy have other opportunities immediately.
Patrick Brown, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, time now to open up the campaign notebook, day 18 of the federal election campaign. And we begin today with the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, starting this Wednesday in Calgary, where he talked about making Canada an energy superpower, supporting the development of critical minerals, the building of an east-west electricity grid, and infrastructure.
Today I'm announcing a new Liberal government will create the first and last mile fund that will connect critical mineral extraction projects to our supply chains to get them to market. In other words, from rock to road and rail. Getting these projects built faster while creating good, higher paying jobs in the trades.
Meanwhile, the Conservative leader was in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario today, promising new measures to get tough on crime. This includes mandatory minimums for violent crimes and a proposed 3 strikes law.
Not only will we repeal Liberal catch and release laws, we will carry out the biggest crackdown on crime in Canadian history. And we will do it by passing the 3 strikes you're out law. 3 strikes you're out means that anyone convicted of 3 serious offenses will be ineligible thereafter for bail, probation, parole, or house arrest. And they will serve a minimum of 10 years behind bars, a maximum of life imprisonment, and they will have to earn their release even still.
And finally, the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was talking pharmacare today, promising to expand the coverage for drugs under the public program that currently only funds birth control and diabetes medication.
Our commitment is New Democrats will fight to bring in the next step, which is to cover all essential medication. These are the medications that are most often prescribed. This is going to give a lot of relief to people that are worried about being able to afford their medication. It's going to save money for families. It's also going to improve our healthcare system.
Well, let's continue our coverage now with a closer look at the races in Winnipeg. We're happy to have on the program this evening radio broadcaster Hal Anderson. He is the host of Connecting Winnipeg on 680 CJOB. Hal, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
Listen, I'm going to ask you to start by giving us a bit of the lay of the land, because at dissolution, Liberals held 4 seats in Winnipeg, the Conservatives had 2, the NDP had 2. I take it that was expected to change as recently as last December, but what would you say about the state of play right now?
Yeah, I don't know. Trump and the tariffs have taken so much oxygen out of this. It's hard to get a read on where people are at with other really important issues. I think affordability is right up there. That sort of falls under the Trump tariff umbrella as well. Probe Research does polling here in Manitoba and in Winnipeg, and they've got it pretty close. They've got it 44 Liberals, 42 Conservatives, NDP in single digits at 9%. So, there's some battlegrounds between the Tories and the Liberals, and we'll see how those play out. I'm more interested, to be honest with you, to be personal here, I'm more interested to see how the NDP do in some of these ridings. Will they hang on to Elmwood at 9% if the NDP have a bad night on the 28th? What about Nikki Ashton up in Churchill? So I'll be watching where the NDP finishes, but in many of these ridings, it's going to be a battle between Liberals and Tories.
Okay, let's dig into that, because as you say, you're keeping a very close eye on the NDP. And when it comes to bases of support for New Democrats, Western Canada really is a place that they look to for consistent support. What has changed here? Have they dropped the ball? Is it about their leadership? Is it about Donald Trump? What are you hearing on that front?
I think it's Trump. I think it's Trump and the tariffs, and this really has boiled down to, I think, a question of leadership. Which leader can handle Trump and the tariff situation? And I think it's become a choice between Carney and Poilievre. And Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are kind of out in the cold looking in. I think it's that simple.
Okay, if it's that simple then, and you're not alone on this, everyone's saying this is now boiled down to a 2-horse race between Liberals and Conservatives. So let's break that up a bit. Liberals right now leading the polls. What is the best, what is the worst thing that people are saying to you about Mark Carney?
Well, when Trudeau was still a prime minister and leading the Liberals, they wanted him gone. I mean, that was just the bottom line. And then once he was gone and Carney was chosen, a lot of people are now giving that party, Carney, a second look. I heard from diehard Liberal supporters when Trudeau was still running things, we want him out of there. His best before date is long past. Let's move on. And then I think Carney, too, being a former governor of the Bank of Canada, I think people say maybe this is the guy who can handle the tariff situation with Donald Trump the best. Plus, I think Poilievre starts getting a hard second look. A lot of times it was believed that he was just going to go on to be the prime minister and the Tories would be in power. And I think now he's starting to get a hard second look, and maybe people are seeing some things they're not sure about with him. It's really, changed on a dime in a very short period of time.
Yeah, changed on a dime, as you say. What are they saying about concerns of Pierre Poilievre?
Well, the big talk on my show, Connecting Winnipeg on CJOB over the past few days, has been, does size matter? His rallies. He had a big one here in Winnipeg at the start of the campaign early on, about 4,000 people. He's had even bigger rallies in other centers. And so that's been a bit of a discussion. A lot of people aren't buying the polls. A lot of people that I hear from on my show say, well, come on, how can it change that quickly for Carney and the Liberals? I think the rallies matter in this sense. I think the rallies are an indication that Tory support, which is strong, is rock solid compared to the support for the Liberals and for Carney. It moved quickly over to Carney and the Liberals, and maybe it could move back again real quickly. I think the debates, I personally think the debates are going to matter big time, 10 days out from Canadians going to the polls.
And what do you think people will be judging Carney on in those debates? If you're talking about a rock-solid support for Conservatives and perhaps a more ephemeral support for Liberals, what do your listeners, your callers, want to see or will be judging Carney on, do you think, when he actually takes to the debate stage?
Yeah, obviously we have a large Francophone community in Winnipeg, in St. Boniface, so I think the French debate will matter, especially in that part of Winnipeg. But I think Carney's performance in French is going to really matter in Quebec, and you know how important that province is, rich in votes and lots of seats. So I think the French debate might matter more than usual. And then when it comes to the English debate, I hear from a lot of Tory supporters that say Poilievre is going to mop the floor with Carney. But I wonder if maybe some Canadians might like Carney's, I'll call it unpolished performance. He's not your typical politician, and maybe boring is what Canadians are looking for right now. And I think it's change in the air, but is changing a leader enough to get enough Canadians to vote for Carney and the Liberals to give them, the Liberals, another term in power? We'll see. I really think it's certainly the most consequential election of my lifetime, and I'm an old guy. But this is, people in the media tend to say, oh, this is, a really, really, really important election. This is an important election.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I appreciate you sharing your insight as we cover this important election. Hal, I hope we get to speak again before this is done, but for this evening, Thank you. Really, really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure.
And that is our program for this Wednesday. Again, day 18 of the campaign so far, halfway through. Much more to come for you. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.